feel could benefit. So to get us going, Bob, if you would, share who you are and kind of what you do for Livingston Haven.
Sure. I'm Bob Decker. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Hyde Park Partners, which is the holding company which owns three operating companies, of which the largest and oldest is Livingston Haven. I get myself into a little bit of anything and everything, as a privately held company, you wear many hats. And so I deal with our sales group. I deal with our manufacturing group, our value add service. I deal with our warehouse. And quite frankly, I tend to get into a lot of locations where, what is needed is difficult conversations. And I'll have to admit that oftentimes when I'm in the room having that difficult conversation, my good friend here, Chris Houston, is sitting right beside me, and so we've had a number of these together in various and sundry ways. So I look forward to chatting about that, and and giving you some tips that we've had, and maybe picking up a few tips also.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So I'm Chris Houston. I've been at L&H for 14 years. I've been on the FPDA board the last, 2 years now, starting the second year. Been a part of the education committee, which hosts these, and being a big part of the current Future Leaders in Motion program. And it's just a real joy to be a part of all these things. I want to let the cat out of the bag as we start this. We are not experts, all right? I want to make sure that we're just going to be sharing things that we've learned along the way. If we had time to be able to hear from each one of you, we would probably be able to gain strategies that you've seen in your life, or perhaps ones that you would want to avoid. So my hope is that today we're going to touch on a couple of things, and these are the objectives that we're trying to do. Hopefully, if you're able, able to see the article that we sent out to hopefully prime the pump and get you thinking about what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about conflict at a high level. What is it and why does it occur? We're going to hear some foxhole stories. And this is really where Bob comes into play. I'm going to ask him some questions about his experience. We're to consider the difference between reacting and responding. And then finally, we're going to try to gain a few tips on how to have what I call a brave communication. Shanna Shute is somebody that I follow, an author, and she said, when conflict occurs, you're standing at the relational crossroads of greater relational intimacy and relational destruction. Conflict mishandled can actually be something that sees relationships destroyed. So at a high level, what are we talking about? What is conflict? Well, if we look at the dictionary.com, it says to come into a collision, a disagreement, a controversy, discord, perhaps brokenness, all dealing with relationships where people are involved, quite honestly. And it can occur within two people, groups, nations, teams, even within ourselves sometimes. And I can only imagine the difficult conversations that you have to have in your environment, whether it be with customers, suppliers, vendors. The point is that nobody is immune from having to potentially address difficult conversations and especially deal with conflict. So why does conflict occur? Well, if we were just looking at it today at a high level again, I read a book called The Power Principle by a guy named Blaine Lee. And he says this: most conflicts arise from unmet or violated expectations, which can lead to feelings of offense. And really, when we have offense in our lives, the chance is that there's going to be a lot of conflict around us. And sometimes those violated expectations are things that haven't actually been communicated very clearly, but we think they had. And then we wonder, what in the world are they doing? Conflict has to be perpetuated, though. It has to be able to have something that keeps it going. And, again, boiling it down, one of those things that keeps conflict going, unfortunately, is pride. Pride is a thing that oftentimes will keep it alive. A fuel for conflict, if you think about a fire that has the oxygen sucked out of it, it actually goes away. But something like a fence actually is like breathing oxygen over embers and allowing that to actually increase. I don't know if you guys have ever engaged in the "oh yeah" crowd, the ones when you're talking to them and you're telling them about a situation, they're like, "Oh yeah, well, have you heard about this? Have you heard the fact that they did this or said this or yada, yada, yada?" And it only adds fuel to everyone's fire about a particular situation, or worse yet, a particular person. A lot of times perpetuation of conflict is because we've created narratives about what's going on that aren't necessarily based in facts. Sometimes they're based in perceptions. We also begin to allow criticism to overshadow compassion when conflict is continuing to be in play. We tend to look at things with a critical eye versus something different. I know for me, sometimes conflict perpetuates because I get hijacked by my emotions. If I ask you to raise your hands, I wonder if you would also join with me in that. And when I do that, I realize that wisdom kind of gets moved out of the way and I let emotions be what dictates the day. I don't know if you guys have ever played the game Jenga. Is that hands raised for a question? Brian, do you have a question?
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Oh,
you asked us to
sweet.
raise our hand.
Okay. Thank you. Obviously, I don't do this very much, so I'm sorry about that. All right. So I just want you to consider the game Jenga. I don't know if you have ever played it, but I think it's a great picture of the cost of mishandling conflict. If you know the game, you know that the players take out individual pieces of the board. In Swahili, it actually means, the Jenga means to build, which is kind of an interesting thing when you think about it. But if you picture trust being this stack of Jenga blocks, every time conflict is mishandled by you as a leader or someone else, it's as if you're taking out one of those pieces and not replacing it. And over time, the foundation gets weaker and weaker till eventually it crumbles. And the worst is that if that leader who caused that mishandling of the conflict then leaves, the team will be harder on the next leader who comes in because the lack of trust that will be there. And so you're kind of impacting or limiting the next leader. Is it possible that it can be earned back, that trust can be earned back? Yes, it is. You've probably heard Stephen Covey before, and I think he said it, that trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. There's a guy named Ambrose Bierce who said, "Speak when you're angry, and you will make the best speech you will ever regret." Think about that. Again, think about how easy it is to get hijacked by our emotions and speak something that we wish we would have never said. All right, with that, I want to jump into the foxhole stories with Bob, and we're just going to go through a few questions, just talking about a fellow FPDA member company. And hopefully something that we say today, you're going to be able to take at least one nugget from. According to the article, Bob, that we read and shared with everybody, Making Conflict Management a Strategic Advantage, it says that conflict has key effects on productivity, decision-making, and retention. So the question to you, Bob, is do you believe that managing conflict is a key business advantage for us at Livingston and Haven, and why or why not?
I do, and I'm going to answer that two-part because, this is an FPDA webinar, and like Chris, I've been on the board for the last 7 years, and recently I had the opportunity to serve as president of FPDA, and the board meets, every fall. We have our annual summit at some location. Several years ago, our location was in Tucson, Arizona, and the board always meets in February timeframe at the location. We have our board meeting. We get together, we tour the facility, we understand what's going to happen, and we can tell the other members, what a great place it is. And actually, the Tucson place was a great place. But we as a board, and a lot of people may not realize that FPDA board members do not run the day-to-day operations of FPDA. We have a company that manages the FPDA, and that's what they do for a living. And we had worked with one particular one for, I don't know, any of us quite knew, 15 years or so. And we had some struggles. We were just concerned about things. And the past president before me, Jeff Beeling, the CEO of retiring CFO of Stoff, we got together and had some conversations. Bill Haley was involved and such. And at the end of the board meeting, Jeff said, I want to ask everybody in the room something. When you leave the FPDA board meeting, what do you do to promote FPDA moving forward? To the people within your company, to people outside of the company? How do you promote the FPDA? So board members, I want you to think about that. But management company, 15 years, we really want to ask you that question. What do you do when you leave this board meeting? And a pin could have dropped in there. And the look of and they knew that we were not happy. And you talking about Jeff did a very professional, very just matter of fact, brought up an area of conflict between the board and our then management company. And to tell the rest of the story, within the next 4 to 5 months, several of us got together and we interviewed a number of folks. And it's led to where we are today. We're very happy with our new management company, Ethereum, who is helping to run this today. But so conflict and conflict management has been within, if y'all are members of FPDA, within the FPDA world. And we handled it, I think, as well as we could. To be perfectly honest with you, FPDA handled it a lot better than the old management company. I mean, I could tell you some interesting phone calls I had over those period of times. But it's the right thing to do. We handled that conflict, and today the FPDA is going in a much brighter path with very good leadership, trying to help us grow as an organization. So that's an example of how if you're a member of the FPDA, how FPDA has entered conflict discussions and have come out very, very good out of that conversation because we were willing to have it and even lead it to the path that we ultimately did. But here at L&H, it is absolutely a key business advantage for L&H. I wrote here, who have I had to have conflict, tough conversations with? Here at the company, I have them with different associates. I've had them at the executive level. I've had it with managers that work for me. I've had it with floor associates. I've had it in various and sundry areas. Just because everything is pretty good in one area of a company doesn't mean it's great in another area of a company. It's hard to end all conflict with one big conversation. But then I look, who else did I? Conflict with customers. Absolutely. I appreciate it. I'd love to send you that unit that you're looking for, but I really need a check. Okay. We have those conversations. Just had one recently. Vendors. You mentioned something about that, Chris. Heavens, yes, you have conflict with vendors. What they're wanting and what you're willing to do could be two different things. I even put down here, I know that it's probably only happened at the Decker household, but occasionally you have that tough conversation within the family unit, right? And I even put one down here, not trying to. I I was in a major conflict conversation at the church level one time, with some personnel within that. So it can be anywhere and everywhere. But what I've learned over my 40 some years of experience, if you don't address it and address it in a professional way, it's going to do nothing but continue to take whatever. Is it the company? Is it the customer? Is it the vendor? Is it the family? Is it the church or whatever? It's going to take it down a path that's not healthy for anybody.
Yeah, those are some great insights, Bob, and I think that especially with the ethereal type conversation when what you were having with the prior, just a reminder that tough conversations are necessary, and sometimes those tough conversations do end up being or causing change. As an example in that way. So, Bob, how have you grown in your ability and willingness to address conflict just over the years? You've been, doing work a long time, and just how have you grown or matured in that area?
Well, I started in the workforce in 1982. Okay, and there was not a lot of conversation about this kind of thing. I worked for one of the largest accounting firms in the world, worked for my own company, and then I've worked for L&H for 22 years. And there was not a lot of discussion of that until I got into starting to get some sales training for my folks. And the first time I ever did DISC, I know that's what our FLM folks are doing, the DISC, and I read what DISC came back to me, and I went, geez, that's not me. And I gave it to a lady, my right hand person, Debbie. And Debbie, I said, Debbie, read this, and confirmed to me this isn't right. And she went, wow, they nailed you. That's you, buddy. and I went and took it to my wife Tricia, and I said, this isn't me, is it? And she went, whoo, man, that is you. And that's when I started, because I'm not sure how I handle things. Quite frankly, there might be a couple people on here that knows I have the ability to have a temper if I need one. And that's led me to the point of learning that I need to handle things better, because I knew that I had handled things in the past. And something that our FLM folks are going through. And if you're not, that's called Future Leaders in Motion. That it's I think we got 12 people doing that this year, Chris, and they're going through classes every month and have mentors and everything else. And one thing that they just recently talked about was emotional intelligence. And what is emotional intelligence? And I will tell you, in 1997, I don't know that I had much emotional intelligence, but it's talking about becoming self-aware. Whoa, that's me on a piece of paper? Ooh, I don't think I like that. Self-regulation, how you start to learn to handle yourself in this, because, one of the things I wrote down here is that when I am talking to somebody, whether it's a group or one-on-one, I've learned the madder they may get about the conversation, the calmer I get. I work to get, okay, because mad is not ever going to equal there, and that tends to calm them down. What is my motivation? Why am I having this conversation to begin with? I don't go looking for conflict. I've just over my life have learned am not afraid of it, because I see what conflict not talked about, not put on the table. We got to talk about this. Who's one of the best wide receivers ever in NFL? But what you always hear when you hear the name T.O., you think of conflict, you think of drama. And yet he was still one of the greatest wide receivers in the NFL. And that's a shame that his name is known for something like that. But then, out of what's my motivation? I gotta develop empathy, because could be a tough conversation for this person. They may know it and just may not want to address it. They may know it and said, "Thank you for bringing this up," and that occasionally happens. And they may not know it and fight you tooth and nail. And then, how do you handle that? Be prepared. And so that it has been a lifelong journey. And trust me, I'm not to the destination yet, nor will I be. But that emotional intelligence learning, and the final thing you've already brought up, William Covey. One of the things that I love out of his book, The 7 Habits, is not necessarily one of the 7 habits, but talk about circle of influence. is what I'm seeing, is what I'm hearing, is what I'm getting ready to have a conversation with somebody. Is that something I can influence? And I love to use the term as evidenced by with somebody. I'm seeing this problem as evidenced by that. I feel like this is a problem.
Yeah, and it's so practical, some of the things that you're saying. And I think the thing I want to point out to everybody, one, do you see his authenticity? He hasn't said that he's arrived, but he's in process. That's where we all are. So that's a good thing. That's a sign of a great leader. But I have actually seen it firsthand, the growth that he's had in this area, and I have seen his influence grow in our company because of it. So it does matter, and I think a catalyst for him that he said is learning emotional intelligence and that self-awareness. So Bob, we talk a lot about culture here. We have a company culture. A lot of times people have that. They have that as marketing material, but they do nothing with it. We actually try to do something with it. How do you think company culture for us, what impact does it have on addressing a conflict using our company culture?
Well, first I go back to a quote that another writer, Peter Drucker. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Peter Drucker's work, but he was noted for making a statement saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. You know what that's meaning? If you have a culture that is not good, it doesn't matter what strategy you put out there. That culture is going to fight that strategy, and you're just going to be aggravated, and everybody else is going to be aggravated. So yes, we intentionally started using the word character, and those words, those letters within character mean different things. Having fun, self-awareness, customer focus, etc. And we actually give out awards each year to within our company of those. And so people understand that character counts here at Livingston Haven, and we work hard to hold people accountable, when they go astray. And, my son did not like being told that he had to eat his vegetables if he wanted ice cream. And, that was his choice. But he learned after a while, he just ate his vegetables so he could get his ice cream. People like to be held accountable in reality. And quite frankly, if you're working with somebody, be it a person, being a customer, being a vendor that doesn't want to be held accountable, I'll question, do you really need to be doing business or whatever it may be with that particular individual? Because they're going to be trying to eat that strategy, whatever it is you're trying to do there. So absolutely that conflict not handled is going to affect the culture, because it's just not going to affect the culture of that one person. If they happen to be on a team of 10 members, it's going to affect every one of those 10 members. And when you're not addressing a problem that everybody sees, that's going to affect you personally, because those people are not going to have that respect. I would have walked in there and kicked that bucket over for any trust that I may have built up with that team if I'm not willing to address the problems at hand. And that doesn't mean that you won't lose a little respect from some people when you do address that conflict, but they're typically the ones that are causing that conflict.
Yeah. Last question for you, just real quick. If resolving conflict is so good, why don't we see more people doing it?
It's not fun. It's not easy. If I just leave it alone, it'll go away. That's the thought of so many folks. I'm looking at the paper that we sent out to everybody, and just talking about some of the large managers, large companies, what percentage of time they do to stress and handle conflict. It's just because not many people are willing to do it. And because if anybody can sit there and said, man, I got into a tough conversation and everything else, and I thoroughly enjoyed that, that's hard to say. Now, I thoroughly enjoyed the end result of some of our tough conversations. I could think of one in particular, and Chris was involved, an individual, and we'd gone through some major changes in this particular area of the company. and it was tough on everybody, but we made a major change. And this was an individual who I respected, but I didn't know that well at that point in time. And they heard something that they thought I said that I didn't say. And maybe I said the word, but they misinterpreted. And this individual actually resigned that day, left. But Chris talked to this individual and they came back in, and before they left for the day, we talked to them and said, we would like to invite you back tomorrow. And that individual came back the next day, and our relationship couldn't be any better now, because we sat there and had that difficult conversation where, in effect, not only did I say, you misinterpreted me, but I also apologize that I may have said it incorrectly. And that's part of that empathy thing, and that motivation and that self-regulation. There's times where I may have caused that problem and didn't mean to. And I think that's part of having that and resolving those conflicts, is to understand that you can be part of that conflict. And that's an area that so many people are just not comfortable with. And it is one that I coach some of my folks on, is that sometimes you've got to have that tough conflict, or that tough conversation, but let's talk about what that looks like. And go in with as much empathy as you can, knowing this is going to be a difficult conversation, more than likely on the person you're talking with than it is on you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for those insights, and just feel free to jump in with anything else that we're going to be talking about. You know, one of the things that I think is a really important thing that we should be able to consider is this. A lot of times conflict is not resolved because we do not have a lot of good examples who manage conflict well. Just look at our society. Just think about how many people you know who are great at this. A lot of times we do exactly what Bob is talking about. This isn't going to be fun. Eventually this will go away. Can I just put my head in the sand? And yet leaders who are going to have influence going forward, increasing in their organization, they're going to have to be good at this particular topic. Some additional thoughts on resolving conflict. It requires guts and maturity, really. It takes courage to be able to address conflict. And it often requires one to confront their own insecurities. Have you ever noticed the higher you go in leadership, the more insecurities you might have, the more immaturity your immaturities are exposed, the more that you potentially get triggered on things that maybe used to when you didn't have as much influence. Oftentimes, immaturity allows conflict to persist and even escalate because we begin to discuss with everybody else the situation rather than doing what our culture would say in our organization, which is go first to the person and start talking to them. So it can be very much a value to the organization. And if you're the one who is a proponent for this, you should see your level of influence increase. So there's a great resource out there called Crucial Conversations. And it says in its stats that businesses are being impacted by the lack of conflict management within them. This particular thing surveyed said 7 out of 10, 70% of employees avoid difficult conversations with a boss, coworker, or a direct report. Don't know how accurate it is in your organization, but pretty interesting if that's true. Out of those, 34% have put off having a difficult conversation for at least 1 month. 1 month coming in every day, putting that off, hoping it goes away. Another 25% of the 70 have put off having a difficult conversation for more than a year. I've seen people within our organization give up their roles before having a conversation that might actually open them up to a better situation. It was worth it to them to leave versus having what they thought would be a really tough conversation. So let's get into this idea of brave communication. What am I talking about with this? Brave is possessing or exhibiting courage. Communication, the transfer of information. Brave communication is the facing of fears and insecurities to be a leader in addressing conflict. The big idea is that effective communication takes courage. Brave communication is identifying and addressing the real issues that are going on, not the perceived issues. Brave communication at the end of the day will lead to trust. Trust is key for any of our long-term success. So really engaging in difficult situation is really what we're talking about. And to be able to do that, Bob kind of mentions this, understand the goal. What are you trying to achieve in this conversation? Brave communication really is about connection rather than a task. It's about trying to maintain relational equity versus winning an argument. Think about how many times we're willing to sacrifice a friendship, relationship, or whatever just to say that we won. And yet at the end of the day, perhaps later on, we're regretting the fact that we did so because maybe they were a great employee or maybe they were a great friend. It's doing things within your control to maintain that relational connection. It's often about listening rather than talking. The point of brave communication is really to try to find those win-win situations that are mutually beneficial. And we have to combat what some call a poverty mindset, which means that somehow if I give away something, I'm going to be in lack. So I'm going to fight for what I'm going to gain and let them be in lack. A poverty mindset can be overcome by thinking about that win-win. How can we both win in this situation? And sometimes a win for the other party is actually being forthright with some opportunity areas that they have to grow in. So we have another resource that I gleaned from Triad Technologies, actually. My mentor during FLM put me onto this. It's a book called Conversational Capacity, and it has the tagline, "The Secret to Building Successful Teams That Perform When the Pressure is On." It defines conversational capacity as the ability to have open, balanced, non-defensive dialogue about tough subjects in challenging circumstances. It goes on to say that a team with high conversational capacity can keep performance in track and productively address the most difficult issues. But a team with low conversational capacity can get off balance, derailed in their performance by even a petty disagreement. Every relationship has a conversational capacity that can expand and contract, and it's no different with teams. This is a picture from the chart within the book, and I just think it does a great job of setting a boundary that conversational can actually be fluctuating on. Anything below the words conversational capacity are topics that teams can actually talk about, that it's comfortable being talked about. And then the things above conversational capacity are those topics that you don't talk about. And you think about that, for some teams, you might have a higher level of capacity for conversations where you can talk about anything. You're given constructive feedback. You're able to really be open and honest and objective about things. Then there's other things that have very low conversational capacity where you don't want to do anything to rock the boat. You're walking on eggshells. You don't ever talk about that, John. That's the one that triggers him. And you begin to limit the team or the relationship. I just want you to get that picture in your mind because I think it's a great idea. If you had to determine your current capacity, where would you put yourself with your team? Where would you put yourself with your spouse if you're married or your significant other? All right, Crucial Conversations is another book that we use, and it's a book specifically that I use here at Livingston Haven, and it talks about crucial conversations being when the stakes are high, opinions vary, and emotions run strong. This is when a discussion takes place between two or more people. I want to share a little insider's guide to a reaction, and this is from the book, and I just think it's a great visual. And this chart happens like this. Okay. You see or hear a stimulus comes in, an email comes through your inbox, you hear a phone call, you're at the vendor, and immediately something takes place. You begin to tell yourself a story, a narrative begins to form about the intent of what's being said. And typically, this is where the judgments begin to be made, and perhaps a victim mindset begins to creep in. When we have a victim mindset, we oftentimes will react in a way that's very not kind, if you will. Then, after we're telling ourselves this story, we begin to feel the emotion, or the adrenaline pipes in. It rushes in from that narrative that's told, and it begins to actually have a physical impact on the body, including the ability to think clearly. A lot of times our worst mistakes are when we're not thinking clearly, right? Action starts to take place, and that's when we are reacting to the narrative that's told. And it's typically where we're the good guy and they're the bad guy, and we're going to correct them in a way that is what we want to do. And we're going to justify our behavior or means to be able to communicate this to them so that, again, we can come up on top and they can be behind us. Two truths that I'm learning that I really think are important, I've already mentioned that, is, again, lead with compassion over criticism, and don't get hijacked by emotions. I just want to reiterate that. I always want to be led forth by wisdom so I can think clearly when conflict is going on. So brave communication really is about choosing to respond and not react. Reaction takes no real effort. It's what feels really good in the moment. It feels natural in the moment to do. And understand that we tend to look at our own issues with this giant telescope. It's way out there, it's huge, but with those that we are in conflict with, we're looking at them with a microscope. Every little thing we're investigating and picking out and prodding and saying, this is why this is, an issue, why they shouldn't be here, and yada, 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 fill in the blanks. Response takes work to be able to do, and has traits of teachability and humility. So I want you to take a look at this. And in the chat, if you would, write down what you see. Bob, sorry, you can't do it. All right, what do you see? Just in the chat, if you can write that down. What do you see, and what do you see here? Okay. What else? Okay. Anything else? Okay, yeah. So you guys are seeing two different things. If I put this like this, it's very easy to pick out the liar, isn't it? You get at the end of the day, it's about perception, right? You're both correct. You see liar, you're right. That's in there. You see a guy wearing glasses or a face, that's in there. And sometimes that's how disagreements are. We might be looking at the same thing, looking at it in two different ways, and truth may be in both of the cases. Let's try this one. See what you have. Again, put it in the chat. What do you see with this one? Okay. Okay. So we have two different answers so far, and obviously you guys would be able to answer different ones. Some people say a duck, some people say a rabbit, but the reality is they're both there. If you look at it going this way, you can see the duck bill going to the left, or if you look at the rabbit's face, that's the ears of the rabbit going to the left. Again, perceptions can play a part in what we see. So what I'd say to you is, just because you have a perspective doesn't mean you have the full picture. And what I'd also say is that this is important because leaders remain curious in conflict. And that's the best way that we can be able to help navigate that. Does anybody know who Viktor Frankl is? He's someone who can certainly teach us about the power of response. He says, between stimulus and a response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In that response lies our growth and freedom. Frankel was not someone who penned a great quote from the lap of luxury. Frankel was actually an Auschwitz survivor. Above the sign leading into Auschwitz, I won't say it because I don't know how to say it, but work sets you free is what it means. What a joke. What a lie that was. But that was what they were saying. Most of the folks ended up like this, somehow losing their life in the camp. So imagine a man, Viktor Frankl, giving words like this about choosing to respond. Listen to what he did. He lost his wife, his mother, his brother in the camps. He spent his days laying track. Probably a lot of those tracks went right into that place where they were burning up Jews that and other people who are in those camps. Amazing to think that that was something that he was a part of. Yet he chose, instead of groveling about this, he began to have meetings in his bunk area with other prisoners. And listen to this. He's encouraging them not to give up on what they did have. He understood that the Nazis could take away many things, but they could never take away the power to choose. I think it's a pretty powerful thought when you kind of take it in. So, responding versus reacting, how can you do it? Well, here's some practical ways that I hopefully in this last few minutes we can be able to unpack quickly. One is to be leading through the process. Your team is going to look to you for guidance on how to handle situations. And to really show proper respect, you need to go to the person first that you're offended with or need to have a tough conversation with before you start bringing in all these other people, so that they can really be respected. And sometimes that can be the very conversation that sets it right, and no further action is needed. But if you have the conversation and it's not corrected, then perhaps bringing in other people to be able to help get resolution will be a part of that. So planning is a key piece of this. I use mind mapping for this. And what mind mapping is just writing down on a piece of paper ideas to help keep you focused on a certain thing. And for me, it's in a situation like this, I would put a defined goal on the page. Something like, I want to together figure out a path forward through this situation. Then I typically write down traits that I want to exhibit: respect, integrity, a willingness to listen, empathy, courage. Then I might write down two things. I'm going to plan for if they get upset, and I'm going to plan for if they don't. That way, I'm not all jacked up, ready to take the bull by the horns, and they show humility. Think about that. But I don't want to also get really upset if they get upset. And so one way to be able to do that is making sure if they're starting to get upset is like ask them, what have you heard me say? I realize that you began to shift here. Your body language changed. Was there something that I said that offended you? Was there something that I said that I need to clarify? And get a little bit of idea on that. And if the escalation continues, then landing the conversation and having it a different day to be able to continue it is great. 24, 48-hour rules, some companies put that into place, a great way to do it. But what if they're humble? Then taking time to really thank them, listening to them, and determining next steps is a great way to do it, especially if they're like owning the fact that of their part in the situation. And then lastly, I put something like remembering to acknowledge the conversational goals, maintaining an open mind. These are just phrases to be able to help me prepare, choose to respond, don't get hijacked by emotion, and own my part. Some other things would be, just thinking about the language. Don't use the words you. You typically produces defensiveness rather than something else like using I versus you. Be very comfortable addressing the elephant in the room. Have the courage to address the obvious but unacknowledged issues. I've been in a number of conversations where we've brought up something that a lot of people thought the person knew about. And when we had the conversation, they had no clue. And you know what? They didn't get upset. They actually thanked me for letting them know. And they actually changed. which is an amazing thing. Be preparing yourself mentally to have those type of conversations. Review your blind spots. Think about that self-awareness, that DISC profile, the Myers-Briggs profile, and utilize what you learned there. You know what triggers you. You know, be prepared to not let that be something that hijacks you in the moment. Use a sounding board. Seek advice if needed. You know, for us, a lot of folks will come by HR and just touch base before they have a conversation if I'm not in the room with them. Knowing your points, being clear about your evidence, your as evidenced by, and anticipate potential responses. And then finally, following up. Even if the conversation goes sour, you can still demonstrate respect by sending a follow-up. Thank you for the time. I realize we're still potentially in disagreement. Let's continue to have this conversation and be proactively demonstrated. You want to try to move towards resolution versus being a winner, if you will. So remember, just like fire, oxygen is going to keep conflict raging. So what sucks out oxygen oftentimes is a genuine apology, especially if there's something that you contributed to the situation on. Owning your part and exemplifying teachability can be a really powerful thing. Final thought is to lay the great foundation to have good conversations with folks. It really is in the day-to-day. It's not in the midst of conflict. John Maxwell says, ideas of earning respect and gaining your place. These are gained through building your reputation over time. So again, getting to know folks, consistently being the type of person that you want to do, so that when you draw from the bank because you're needing to address something with the person, they know that you are looking out for their best interest, which is a big thing. All right, so that's the presentation, and just wanted to open it up. If anybody has any questions or comments that y'all would want to make, you can unmute and say it, or throw it in the chat if you'd like. Any questions or any? All right. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today to be a part of this webinar. Remember that this will be available. If there's anything in this that you think would be beneficial to other people, go to the FPDA on demand under the educational tab and get the link and send it out to whoever you'd like to be able to help gain just a better understanding of the importance of having difficult conversations within even the context of business. All right, I hope you guys have a very Merry Christmas, and we'll look forward to seeing you in a FPDA webinar in the new year. Kathy, anything that I'm missing?
No, I think you covered it all. Thank you so much, Bob and Chris. You have some wonderful comments in the chat if you haven't seen it. And happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, guys.